911, what are you reporting?
I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Damn it, I'm really confused. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence, and he was dead when she hit the ground. I didn't see any cars. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence.
What are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was?
It was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
See ya!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
All right, folks, I want to welcome our guest to the show. It is Daryl from Bigfoot Believers and Other Creatures from Facebook. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
I've been looking forward to this conversation, so let's get right into it. Let's talk about this Bigfoot and cryptid thing. First and foremost, I know you got some experiences you're going to share with us, but tell the audience what got you interested in the subject to begin with.
Well, what got me interested in it, I would say that I probably always believed that Bigfoot existed. I was never researching or really thought not much about it, but I did believe that if they were out there, that they were mostly in the far west of the United States, which would be Oregon, California, Washington State, and over into Canada, those areas. But I got that changed in my mind. November the 6th of 1992, I was deer hunting and went into a real deep area on my grandfather's farm. And it was opening day of muzzleloader, which is black powder. And I went there every year with three of my friends, and we'd take my camper and all of our gear, and we'd camp out next to my grandfather's barn and have a big time. And my grandfather had told me, we always got deer every year. I said, where would be the best place to go to get a trophy? And he was on his back porch, pointed over, and he said, "You see that third hollow, that third hill there?" And I said, "Yes, I do." He said, "Go over there." And I said, "Well, okay, that sounds good to me." So my grandfather had a large farm in Cannon County, Tennessee, and he was 92 years old at that time and still in unbelievable health and lived by himself. And I actually went in the day before and walked in there, and it was a good walk. I had to go cross three barbed wire fences and go through the gate to get to the field, to get to the woodline area. And I got over there, crossed all those hills, and found a creek where he told me there would be an old grist mill, what was left of it, and that would be the spot. And I went in and put all my gear there, and I had a climbing stand, which you put around a tree and you climb with it. And I found a tree and put it around the tree and climbed up it and sawed off a few limbs with my little saw and got ready for the next morning. Came back down and had a creek right in front of it. And I'm pretty much on like a 45-degree angle on this tree because there was a real steep backside of a hollow. And the creek was in front of me, and I was about 25 foot up when I got up to where I wanted to be in the stand, and got down and looked around for some signs of deer, and I found some fresh scrapes for a pretty good sized buck, or the male deer was in the area. And I crossed the creek and hung what they call a drag rag, and that's what you put on your boot when you're going into the woods, and it has a doe and estrus scent on it, and it keeps your scent trail off the ground. And a lot of times one will track that in, a buck will, trying to find a doe. And I hung that in a tree. I jumped up and grabbed the limb and tied it to it and let it go up. It was probably about 10 foot off the ground. And pretty much from there, I went back and we had a camper there, my camper, and we all had four-wheelers and spent that afternoon and evening with my friends grilling out and getting ready for the hunt the next day. And so my granddad had said, wake me up about 4 o'clock in the morning. And he said, okay, I'll do that. And he usually got up at 4 or 4:30. And he came down that morning and knocked on the camper and said, my granddad never called me by my name. He always called me boy. And he said, boy, time to get up. And got my gear and headed that way. And behind his house, you go through a gate, and then it goes into a sage grass field about 200 yards wide. And then you get to the edge of the woods, and he had cattle in there inside to the wood line, and there was a barbed wire fence there. I crossed that barbed wire fence and went up that hill, crossed over that hill, went down to the bottom of it, and went up another one and crossed down the bottom of it. And it was a good 45 minute to an hour walk, and in the dark is a little harder because I didn't know that area. I'd hunted there all my life, but never that far in. And I think it was on the second hill down, I started hearing something walking. Now, I wasn't sure. I'd stop and it would stop. And I heard something to the left of me. It was on the hill that I'd just come down, and I shined my flashlight, and didn't see anything. So when I crossed, I just went ahead and went over the third hill and went down by the creek and found my stand. And I still heard this walking, and it would stop. And I kept shining a light, and I couldn't see it. Never did see anything. And started thinking, well, maybe it was another hunter. But I knew my friends that were camping, they went in different areas. We all hunted a different area. And a couple of those had stands that were built, that we'd built a couple of years before. But kind of got a little nervous thinking what it was. I was thinking it was a hunter, but I couldn't believe someone would be there on my grandfather's property because he didn't allow anybody to hunt but us. And I got in my stand, climbed up, got set in it, and got everything set up. And my stand had a little bar that pulled down in front of it. And the bar in front of it had like a camo thing that dropped down and covered your feet up. And pretty much everything from about your neck down was covered up. And I always wore blackout under my eyes where the light wouldn't reflect off of it. And I was sitting there and I didn't hear any sounds, and it was still dark at this time. It was probably after 6:30 area when I started hearing regular critters running around the ground, squirrels, that type thing. And it was real fog that morning. The creek below me, there was a fog on it, and I really couldn't see it real well past that. And I got set up. I was ready to go, and I had my gun loaded and everything. And I remember looking down at my gun and making sure I had a cap on it. And about that time, it was just daylight. It was probably 7:30, 7:15 by that time. And I seen three. To the left of me was a large cane field. And when I say cane field, these are like cane that grow on a riverbank. And or a creek bank, and it went a long way down this creek bank to the left of me. There was a little ravine in between it and this cane field. These cane were probably 10, 12, 15 foot tall in the middle, and it was real thick in there. And I seen 3 deer come out of there, and they walked through the creek, went up on the bank, and on the other side of the top of that bank, there was a game trail. And that game trail went all the way down to where I'd hung that drag rag. And I watched the deer walk around, and it was 3 doe. They didn't have any antlers on them. And it was a bigger one and a couple not as big. They were probably yearlings from that deer. And they just milled around like deer do, and in the leaves and everything else. And eating some acorns and walking around. And I probably watched them it was probably about 8 o'clock or a little after 8. They were there a good 45 minutes to an hour, and they were just walking around taking their time. They weren't startled or anything. And then all of a sudden, the lead deer, which was the bigger deer, it was kind of to the left a little further than the other two. The other two one was to the left of that, and one was kind of behind it. Her ears came up, and like she had heard something. And then all three of them did that, and I was watching them very close, and she turned her head to the left, and when she turned her head to the left, she got kind of stiff, and I know that look from a deer, like something had kind of startled them, and she made a really loud blowing noise, like a deer will do, and then just kind of moved her neck back, and I remember taking her right foot and just kind of kicking it a couple times. And then all of a sudden she turned to the right and went and took off running as fast as she could across in front of me to the right down the other side of this creek bank. And all three of them did. They were running like somebody had shot at them. They were just full speed out of there. And I immediately thought, well, it's going to be a big buck with coming out, and it's probably coming down, and they ran from it. And they don't normally run like that, deer don't, but anyway, so I waited and didn't see a buck come out, but I was thinking one was. And about that time, I could see in the middle of the cane thicket, these tall canes were moving, like really moving, swaying, and something was coming through the cane, and it was pretty intense how much they were moving. And I was trying to think, well, this must be a really big deer, and it was just moving all the cane really hard. And then this creature stepped out, and when it stepped out, it took one step and just jumped across the creek, one leap. And the creek was probably, I don't know the exact distance, 10 foot wide. It wasn't a large, wide creek, but it was a creek that ran all the time. It was probably a foot deep. And when it landed on the game trail on the other side, and it turned to the right and walked right down straight ahead of me across the creek, turned and looked at me. And by this time, I was completely in shock. I couldn't even believe what I was seeing. I was about as scared as I've ever been. I don't scare easy, and I know I never had fear like that in me before. But this thing was looking right at me. It showed me its teeth, and the teeth were just not square. They weren't fangs or any type of canines. They were just regular teeth. Showed me its teeth, gritted them at me while it was looking at me. And I was just froze. I didn't know what to do. I had one shot with a 50 caliber black powder rifle, and I had my hand on my gun, and I started thinking, if I shoot this thing and it doesn't take it down with one shot, it's going to come across the creek and just rip me out of this tree. So I decided not to fire. And it was going through my mind so fast on what to do. I was absolutely terrified. And I'd never seen anything like that. And then it growled. And the growl it made, I can feel right now, it actually gives me chills on my arms thinking about that growl. It was a low, intense growl like it was angry. And it's still staring at me. And then it turns and it walks over to where that rag was I hung in the tree. It reaches up and pulls the rag and smells of it, and then it just rips the entire tree limb out of the tree. Now, this wasn't a large limb. It was probably 3 or 4 inches round where it met the tree, the body of the tree, but it was still pretty strong, but ripped it completely out and threw it on the ground. And then I was really scared. I thought this thing is going to come across here and come up and just pull me out of this tree stand. And it took a step back to the right just a little bit, to the left a little bit, and then it let out a scream that I still have never heard today, even on any of the recordings. I've never heard a scream like that. It was a low, intense, growling, long, screeching scream, and it echoed all down through that hollow. And it looked right back at me, and I thought, well, this is it. It's coming across the creek. But instead of crossing the creek, it turned and walked away, turned to its right, and walked straight behind back into the brush and the trees. And I watched it go out of sight. And by that time, I was so scared, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if it was coming back or it was going to get other ones, or I had all kinds of things crossing in my mind. And that was 8:23 in the morning, and I remember looking at my watch. And back in those days, I had those old, you probably remember them when I was younger. Everybody wore those old Iron Man watches, and you could see the dial real big, and it lit up in the dark. And I jumped. I decided just not to climb down, just jump. And I jumped completely out of the tree stand and with my rifle and hit the leaves, and there was leaves all under me, and I was on a real steep bank. So I slid all the way into the creek and still had my rifle in my hand. I jumped up out of the creek and I ran up on the bank and ran around the side of that. And there was a little kind of like a little ravine to the left there that was easier to go up. And I went up that and crossed that first hill, and I was running as fast as I could, looking back to see if it was coming. And I crossed the top of that hill and got down to the second hill to cross. And I looked up, and the thing was standing on top of the hill I just came from, and it was just looking at me. Well, that got me even more frightened. I thought, this thing's going to take off running and catch me. So I ran up that hill, ready to cross that. I'd already crossed a couple of barbed wire fences in between there, but they were old barbed wire fences, which were you could step across because my grandfather hadn't had cattle in there. And when I got over the top of the last hill, I looked back and didn't see it. And I crossed down the last hill, and at the very bottom of the last hill, there was a newer barbed wire fence between the sage-grass and my grandfather's gate that went to his yard. And I ran down that hill as fast as I could, and I jumped that barbed wire fence running at full speed and caught the bottom of my left pants and just ripped my pants all the way up to my thigh and cut a huge gash in it. And I was at that point so much adrenaline that I just ran as fast as I could through this sage-grass field. It was about 200 yards wide. And when I got to my grandfather's gate, I opened the gate and latched it back real quick and stood there looking around, trying to see if I seen the creature. I didn't see it anywhere. And then I ran into the back door. My grandfather lived in a old farmhouse, and the back porch, he had a screen door. I went through the screen door and went into the back area there. You go into the kitchen, and I locked the door, and I looked out the glass windows and didn't see the creature. And I ran into the right where my grandfather was sitting. It was kind of like a living room area, and he was sitting there in his rocking chair, and I went over and sat down there was a big pot-belly stove he had almost between the corner and the center of the room. And I sat down in the floor over there behind it, and I was still scared to death. And he said, "Boy, what's wrong with you?" And I said, "I don't know, Granddad. I seen something I've never seen before. It was a huge monster in the woods." And he said, "Monster?" And I said, "Yeah, I don't know what it was. It was the meanest looking thing I've ever seen." And he said, "Oh, you seen the wood booger?" I said, "A wood booger? What is a wood booger?" He says, that's what we call them up here. He said, I've seen 4 in my lifetime. He said, probably should have told you that area you're in. They live over in that area. And he said, they've never harmed me, and they don't bother you. They just don't like you in their territory. And by that time, I was still not feeling any better. My leg was bleeding, and I was trying to get my composure back, and I was running, looking out the windows and the back door, thinking this thing was coming to the house. And he was just taking it like it wasn't a big deal. And I said, well, why didn't you ever tell me about these wood boogers? And he said, well, if I'd have told you about them, you wouldn't have hunted in the woods like you did all your life, and you wouldn't have spent the night with your friends in the hayloft and camped there on the farm growing up. And he said, that was my reason I hadn't told you. And I said, well, they're here everywhere. And he said, well, I've only seen 4. He said, there's a lot more of them, but I'll be working in the fields and I'll look up and spot one watching me on occasion. And he said in the wintertime, they come to the chicken house, and he had a whole log-built chicken house to the left of his backyard. And he had a lot of chickens in there and sold eggs, and raised chickens. And he said the wintertime they come in and they'll take 3 or 4 chickens, 2 or 3, whatever they want, and they'll leave a little stack of rocks and sticks like they're paying for it. And by this time, I was like in another world thinking, I've never heard of these things. My granddad has never told me. And I was just at the point, I was almost in shock. So I pretty much stayed in the house with him for a couple hours, didn't speak a whole lot or say anything. And my buddies had come back by that afternoon, and they had a deer in the tree they were skinning out. And I walked down to the camper, and I was talking to them, and I was still kind of, and my grandfather says I was white, like I'd seen a ghost. But I said, you guys ever seen anything up here the whole time we've been hunting here? And we've been hunting there 4 or 5 years at that time. We always went the whole week of muzzleloader, the opening of black powder. And they said, what are you talking about? I said, something like a creature in the woods, like maybe a Bigfoot type creature. And they all just started laughing. They said, you had too much to drink last night. No, we had never seen anything like that. So I pretty much left it at that. I didn't say anything else about it and never mentioned it to them or really anybody else. And pretty much went back and stayed in the house with my granddad the rest of the week. I didn't stay out there with him. I'd stay out there long enough till they went to bed. Then I'd go stay with my granddad in the house. But that was my first experience. And I didn't go in the woods or hunt for probably 7 years. I never went back to that spot. I guess my stand's still probably there if somebody hadn't been there and taken it, or the creature didn't rip it out of the woods. But never been back there. So had nightmares regularly for, probably a year. The first few weeks were no way to sleep. It really changed my life completely. I didn't hunt at all. Didn't go in the woods, didn't want to go in the woods. My friends asked why we weren't going up there anymore, and we did go up there one more time and hunt. I didn't hunt, they did. And I just told them I didn't care about hunting anymore. And I stayed with my granddad, and they stayed in my camper. But that was my first experience.
Well, let's go back to the creature itself. I want to get a little bit of detail, if we can, about how far away this thing was when you saw it, how far this thing was when you saw it away from you, how big it was, the hair, and talk about, you got a good look at this thing's face. So talk about that, if you would. How big was it? How far away? And talk about the face that you got to see.
It was somewhere between 50 to 70 feet from me. Feet, not yards. The face looked like black leather. It had hair around the face, but not a lot around the eyes or the nose. It was under it. It was solid black. The eyes were white with black in the middle. By the tree, I'm guessing it was probably about 8 foot tall. It was not one of those I've heard of being taller, way up there tall, like 10 or 12 foot. I'm guessing it was probably about 8 foot tall. It had the most evil face that I've ever seen to this day. And I've been around many forest people and Bigfoot since that time, but I've never seen another one like this one. And I actually went to the library after that and tried to find, this was in 92. Now, in 92, there really wasn't a lot of talk about Bigfoot or Sasquatch or forest people, whatever you'd like to call them. People then, it was 30 years ago, 31 almost now, but I looked at the library for several weeks. I'd go in there and try to find pictures of them, and I'd always heard stories and seen a few documentaries on TV, and even I'd seen the Boggy Creek Monster. I'd even seen that by then, but didn't know where I believed it or not. But I looked up different pictures in books, and I did find a picture that looked like this creature, and I don't remember the name of the company. I do actually have a picture that I'm talking about, but it was called the Type 2. In these pictures, it was called the wood booger, and it looked just like that picture. So that's the only way I can relate to. My grandfather had called it the wood booger, and he said all the old people in the area, which he grew up, he was born there. He was born in the hollow that I actually seen this creature in. The old home place was still there, but it had fallen in. You could see the tin roof of it. But his parents had lived there when they were growing up. But the only way I can describe it is it was called the Type 2, and I can't remember I actually seen it again. I think it was on Reddit that I've seen another picture similar to that one called the Type 2 wood booger. It was just nothing like any of the ones I've seen in my later years since then. So it was big chested. It was a big creature. It wasn't like the patty type, not massively heavy. I'm just a rough guess, probably between 600 to 800 pounds would be my guess. You can ask me something else if you like. I don't really know how much better to describe it.
No, that's perfect. I appreciate that. So you obviously didn't go in the woods for a while after this thing ran you out, but you went back in the woods eventually because you've had other experiences. How long did it take you to get back into the woods, and what was your next experience with these things?
Well, I actually hunted a little bit after that, but I didn't go in the woods. I had spots that I own a farm too, and my farm is about 90 miles from where that's at, and I would park in my truck with a friend of mine, and when we deer hunted, and we didn't go in the woods, and we just parked in a certain area, and a lot of times they would come out. But I really wasn't. I wasn't hunting at all on my second occurrence. I wasn't hunting. I had a spot in Tennessee on the Cumberland River, which runs pretty much across the state of Tennessee, and it goes through Nashville also, but it's a good ways from Nashville. But it's called the Cumberland River. It's a good sized river, and I'd fished on a spot there for a long time. Since I was in my early teens, I'd fished there, and there's actually a sewer plant that's not. You go down an old road, and there's a sewer plant there that actually takes care of the water and sewage for part of Metro Davidson County, which is part of Nashville and the Goodlettsville area. And I had some friends that their dads worked there, and that's how I had found the place. One of my friends that I fished with, he said, I got a good spot. Let's go down and park behind where my dad works, and we can go through a gate and fish. So I'd actually been with him at that time when I first found out about this place, and he didn't fish as much as I did, and he didn't mind me going there, and his dad was fine with it. So you had to drive your car in this road, and you would go down behind this plant, and there was a gate you had to go through, and you had to open the gate manually, and then you drove in behind the plant where the employees there parked their cars, and I would pull in the corner there, the left corner, and park my car out of the way. And there was another gate that opened up that went into the woods behind it. Well, the woods behind it had a trail, a game trail basically is what it was, where deer had used regularly. But the trail was a pretty good trail. It was kind of muddy in there, but you had to walk down that trail probably 200 yards maybe, and it went along the side of the riverbank. It was probably 15 yards probably from the riverbank. And you would walk down that trail, and there was a spot that I fished there. And we fished there quite a bit, me and a couple of my friends. We'd go there after football practice and fish. And then I started fishing there a lot more than they did because they didn't like fishing as much as I did. So I'd go there by myself at times. And this particular time I was in there fishing, and the water was regular height. And sometimes the water gets real high there and it'll cover up this spot, but this particular spot has a bank that goes down maybe 7, 8, 10 foot. It kind of drops off, has a lot of tree roots sticking out of it, and you walk down to it and you get on this sandbar, and the sandbar goes out into the middle of the river when the water is regular level, and you can walk out on that sandbar. And I fish up on top of the bank, but when I fish, I would cast way out, and it would sink down somewhere around the sandbar. And I caught it, and came in that day, and I always fish with minnows there, and I had a styrofoam minnow bucket. And I came in that day to fish, and I had all my equipment set up and everything, and I had a chair I sat in. Well, now that day, I'll take that back. I had a 5-gallon bucket that I'd carried some of my equipment with in it, and I sat on it. I turned it upside down. And I'd caught a fish, and you have to walk down the bank right there onto that sandbar, because if you don't, your line will get hung up on those roots if you try to reel it up onto the bank. So I'd walked down that sandbar, and I'd caught several fish that morning, and I walked down and got the fish off and put it on a stringer. And I went back up to where I was sitting for my minnow bucket to put another minnow on, and my minnow bucket was gone. Well, I couldn't figure out what happened to my minnow bucket. I was looking around, and when I'm sitting down facing the river, it would be to the left of me. That game trail goes down through some real intense, thick brush, and there's a lot of ivy. It's just tons of ivy, and it grows up all the way up next to a train track, all the way down next to the river. And that game trail goes down through there, and there's a couple more spots way on down you can go, but I never went down there very often. So I walked down that trail a little bit as far as I could. I'd have to bend over because it was so growed up, and I couldn't find my minnow bucket. I came out and looked again, and it wasn't in the water, and I couldn't find it anywhere. So I immediately started thinking, well, somebody's down here playing a joke on me. They took my bucket and hid it somewhere. And I looked around, and I couldn't find it, and never did find it. So I pretty much got all my gear together and hid it out and went back to my vehicle. And a couple of days, I think it was the next weekend, I went down there and fishing again and brought another minnow bucket. And this time the water was up. It had been a lot of rain, and the water was up above that sandbar. You couldn't see the sandbar. It was up almost next to the edge of the bank that dropped off. And I got set up and got my pole out, and I had a couple poles out at one time, and had minnows on them, and had caught a pretty good sized fish. And I went to the edge of the bank and reeled it up and got it up on the bank, and I'd taken it off, and I went back, and my minnow bucket was gone again. Well, it was a storm blowing in about this time. The wind had started blowing right before I'd caught that fish, and the water was kind of high and everything else, and it was like about to come a thunderstorm. The wind was picking up pretty good, and I thought, well, maybe it blew in the water with all this wind, and of course the styrofoam minnow bucket doesn't sink. And I started looking down the edge of the bank and the river and everywhere else, and there again, I'd lost another minnow bucket. So I'm thinking, well, somebody's in here and they're taking my minnow bucket. Still on my mind about that. So anyway, I had no minnows. So I left and went back to my vehicle again. And it was probably a couple weeks before I got back down there. But this time, I went and got another minnow bucket and I tied a good size small rope or string to the minnow bucket has a metal handle on it that you carry it with. And I tied a string on that. And I actually, when I went down there, I tied it around the tree that was behind me. And that was probably 10 to 15 foot long, the string. And I tied it on the minnow bucket was already tied to it. I tied it around the tree where nothing would happen to my minnow bucket this time. And I'd been there a while and I'd heard some noises to the left, but I didn't know what it was. Some type of deer or something walking in there. It's so thick you can't see back in there. It's so much ivy. And it's real tall ivy, maybe 7, 8, 10 foot tall. And it's kind of like the trail goes through that. You have to really get down low to get through it. And it was real muddy that day. And I caught a fish and I'd come back again. And this time the water was back down to normal level so I could walk out on the sandbar. And I'd walked out there and came back and put my fish on my stringer. And I looked up to get I walked back up to get a minnow out of my minnow bucket. And the minnow bucket was pulled all the way down toward that trail where it got real thick and the string was real tight between the tree and the bucket. And the bucket had actually tipped over a little bit and water had been spilt out of it. And I walked over to it, and by this time I'm thinking, well, something's in these bushes or this ivy taking my minnow bucket. So I went over to get my minnow bucket, and I looked in the minnow bucket. There was only one minnow left, and I had like 3 or 4 dozen in there, and I just started fishing. So I thought that was kind of strange. Well, then I looked down, I started thinking, well, I'm going to go down this trail a little bit and see what this is or if somebody's down there. So I basically got almost on my knees to get through the trail, and then it kind of opened up a little bit. And to the left, I seen a minnow bucket, and a little past that to the right, there was another minnow bucket, and I figured, well, there's my 2 minnow buckets that I lost originally, both times before. And I thought this is kind of strange, And then I looked down next to the minnow bucket, and going down that muddy area on that trail, there was pretty good sized tracks, like barefoot tracks. And I thought, what is this? It kind of alarm went off in my head. Oh no, I've done run into these things again. So I backed out pretty quick and got my bucket and backed out and sat there on that behind a tree, sat there on that bucket and watched for a few minutes. And I seen a small one. It wasn't a large. I call them forest people because I believe that's what they are. It was a small one, and it had its hands around a tree, and it was down in a crouching position with his foot sticking out close to the trail, and it was kind of swaying back and forth, hiding its head behind the tree looking at me. Well, by this time, when I seen it, I got kind of nervous and kind of scared, and so I got all my gear, got my minnow bucket, and I got out of there. So went back to my vehicle and stayed on my mind for days before I decided to go back down there. So I didn't know if I wanted to go back or not. I was trying to make my mind up if I wanted to. So finally I went back, and this time I carried my gun with me. And it was just a small shotgun. And I went down there and set up like I was fishing, but I wasn't fishing. I was mainly sitting on the bucket next to the tree, trying to get a glimpse of what these things were. And I had my gun with me. It was sitting next to the tree. And then I seen one come out, may have been the same one. I can't say that it was, but it looked similar. and it was on the trail, and I could see it, swam back and forth looking at me. And then another one came out. It was just about the same size, and it was doing the same thing, kind of looking at me. And I finally seen a third one, and it was bigger, but it wasn't 8 foot tall or anything. I'm guessing probably more like 6 foot tall. And it was looking at me. So I sat there for a while. I had my gun, and all they did was look at me, and then they would go back in, and then they finally didn't come back out, and I didn't know where they were at. So I pretty much started thinking, well, I'm back with some more of these creatures again, but they don't seem aggressive or nothing like the other one, and they don't look anything like the other one. These look more like the patty type face ones. It was more of that type head and face, and they were black also, and but they were younger ones. I don't think they were full. I know they weren't full grown. I wouldn't think so, but I did that for, oh gosh, I became friends with those things, fairly good friends with, especially the two younger ones, and they did show me themselves several times, and I could hear bigger ones back in there. And I started bringing them gifts, and I don't know why I even thought of that, because I never even heard of gifting at that time, but I started bringing them different type food, apples, bananas, that kind of stuff, and I made a little wooden box that I actually took a hammer and nail and nailed it up in a tree right over from where I was sitting at, and I put stuff in it. I would put the apples and that type thing in it, and they would come and get them out and take them back in the woods and eat them. So that went on for, I don't know, 1.5 years, 2 years maybe, and I got they were friendly with me. When I'd walk into the woods, I could start saying, I'm coming in to visit you today, and I could hear them running through the limbs and breaking limbs and hear them in the ivy over there, and they were real friendly, and they never tried to be aggressive or growl at me or anything that scared me. And I actually, one of the younger ones, I never got like, grabbing a hold of him or shaking his hand distance, but he got really close to me a couple times, probably 40 or 50 foot away, maybe a little less than that. But he would come out and look at me and just stare at me and not try to be aggressive. So I had a crazy idea. They would bring me gifts. They brought me a milk carton. And I still have that milk carton, I believe, in my garage because I saved it. It was the first gift I'd ever got. They had found an old milk carton in the river or close somewhere around the riverbank, and it was one of those half-gallon milk cartons that was originally it was red and white, but it had faded out to more of a pink color in the sun. And they had stuck a stick through one side, out the other side, and then a stick through the other side. It was a square carton through the side. It made kind of an X shape. And they had left that in the gifting spot for me. And I thought that was pretty cool. These things were giving me something back. And so I'd come up with some kind of crazy idea. I don't remember how I come up with it, but I was actually at a dime store before I went down to visit them. And I bought them a pack of plastic whistles. And these were just like a little plastic whistle that had a little black string on it that, you give kids to play with. And I can't remember how many was in there. There wasn't very much, but it seemed like there was 8 or 10 in there. And when I went down that next time, I hung those whistles with that string up on branches all around there. And just to see if they would use them or were intelligent enough to use them. And I already figured they were, because I could tell that they weren't an ape. They were smart, because they could hear my voice, and I would hear them make noises back in there when they heard my voice. They get excited when I came, and I'd always bring them something. I found out that they like cantaloupes the best as fruits, and bacon was their favorite meat by far, cooked bacon. And They did like donuts too. They love Krispy Kreme jelly-filled donuts. So I brought those whistles anyway and left them as I was leaving that day. And the next time I came back in, as I was walking in, it's about 200, maybe 150 to 200 yards from the gate to the trail where I'd seen them. And I could hear these whistles blowing, and it just was amazing. I could hear a whistle blowing way back in there where I couldn't see. I could hear one to the left blowing. I hear one across the river blowing. And they would start blowing those whistles when I came in. And it was just amazing. I couldn't believe these things were that smart. And they weren't really nothing like I thought they would ever be. And by that time, I'd quit carrying my gun, and I felt comfortable with them. And I became pretty good friends with them, as far as I guess you could call them a friend, because they tolerated me and enjoyed being around me, and I enjoyed being around them. But I never seen but the three that I mentioned. I seen those same ones, or ones that sure look like. The one I know is the same one I seen every time. He was probably a 5-foot tall male, and he would come out more than the other ones would. But I could hear other ones back in there, but I never seen them. But pretty much did that for almost maybe a little longer than 2 years. And then I got to working and I had something going on. I didn't get a chance to go back down there for, it'd probably been 2 or 3 weeks. And when I went down there the next time, I was just shocked. The sewer plant had tore down all the trees between the gate I went through and all the way back past where that ivy was. They cleared that whole entire area out with dozers and whatever they used to clear with, backhoes, whatever. And it was just level, nothing but dirt and completely. And they had stakes up where they were adding on to the sewer plant. They were building another extension back there. And it wasn't built, but it had been cleared, and they had stakes up and kind of like footers built where they were going to dig and add on to that plant. And that was pretty sad because I walked back in there even a lot further and went through all type of thick cover and yelled for them and hollered for them, and I never seen those creatures again. I don't know if they were killed or if they found out about them there at the sewer plant or what happened to them, because I only told one person. One of my friends did go in there with me one time, and it scared him to death. He ran back to the car. He didn't want to be around them. And I don't know what happened to him. To this day, I don't know what happened to him.
I'm very curious about the gifting thing, because that's something that's been going on here on the property over the last month or so. I believe that I'm having some kind of interactions as far as gifting is concerned, because I went out there yesterday, I believe it was maybe the day before, and I'd put some sun butter out on this gifting stump where I've had an apple bitten, I've had a turtle shell show up, and I put the sun butter out there and the jar's gone. And of course, I've never said it was Bigfoot. I've never said that. I never will, because I didn't see it. And I had a trail cam up, but there was no batteries in it and there was no SD card, because every time I've had the camera up, nothing happens. The second the cables, I disabled the camera, something happens. The apple's taken, the apple's bitten, or now the sun butter jar is gone. And I replaced it. And as we record this now, I went out there this morning and it's still there. So that might change. I don't know. But the camera's back up. There's an SD card and there's batteries in the camera. But as far as the gifting is concerned, I've found that really interesting, because I've heard people talk about it. And I mean, what do you think that is? Do you think it is just a simple, friendly exchange between you and these creatures? Do you think there's something more to the gifting? What were you into the gifting for? And what do you think the purpose for them doing that was? Was it just sort of a tit for tat, you're our friend kind of thing?
Well, since that experience, I've learned a whole lot more. So it would be hard to evaluate what I experienced there with my other clan that I interacted in later on. But I've been very fortunate. I truly do believe 100% that some people, and I don't know why it is, and I don't have an answer for it. And I can assure you, I'm no expert at anything. I'm only talking about my own experiences. But, I can tell you that, what I know now compared to what I knew then, that was in probably 99 to about 2001 when that all happened. And um, there's a lot of reasons for gifting, and I've learned my lesson on gifting compared to what I knew then. My main goal then was to give them something to show that I wasn't trying to harm them. That was the only reason I had, and that I was trying to tolerate them and them tolerate me. Um, I actually a couple times, did take them a bucket of minnows and leave it and not wait on them, just leave, and they would eat them. So what I think about gifting now compared to then is you really need to ask permission for those before you gift. Now, these were different. I was very fortunate. They were a completely different type than the first type that I'd seen. And I do think that's probably why I never seen any of the big adults that were probably in there. I could hear them something back in there. I can't say that it was large adults, but it sure sounded like something really large. And I'm sure they were watching over them too to keep them from being harmed. So I think that gifting, it shows them that you are trying to friend them or trying to accept them and them accept you. But at the same time, it also kind of interferes with the way they live, because they first of all, in my personal opinion, don't think that they think they're above us. We're under them. We're not the top of the food chain. They are. And the reason why I say that is because the way they seem to act around people, they don't like to be. These were younger ones, and I think that the adult ones let them do this because they wanted them to interact with people, but only certain people. And I know that some people seem to have something in them, like me, that these creatures feel safe around, and I kind of like attract them somehow. And I've got other friends that say that, but I've had friends that's been hunting in the woods 40 years or longer and never seen anything, and they don't even believe in them. But after you interact with one, they all seem to be more open to you. And I don't know. I've heard people say they mind speak. I've never been mind spoken to. I do think they tried to do that with me because I had a very strange feeling at times, and I've had a couple of those thoughts cross my mind in that time frame. They don't like. I'm talking about my own experience, and other people I've heard could put what you're talking about, a type of peanut butter out, and they'll eat it and all that. I tried peanut butter numerous times, so most they would do would be stick their finger in it and put the jar back. They didn't seem to want anything like that, the ones I've been around. Now, my gifting partner at my other location, he did have a jar on a tree with the lid screwed into the side of a tree, and they did unscrew it and eat the peanut butter. So I guess it just depends. It's like people. Some of us like things, other people don't like those type of things. Gifting can be dangerous, in my opinion, too, in certain areas. It depends on the type you run into. There's some out there just like people. There's good ones and there's bad ones. And there's going to be some bad ones in some of these groups, or some of these groups may be more aggressive than other groups. But the very first one was super aggressive and didn't want me there. These welcome me to be there. So my thought is, what I gifted later on, the last clan that Billy Howell, one of my research partners, gifted, we asked them, is it okay if we leave you something? Because you're going into their house. You're not going in when you don't welcome them into your house without them welcoming them into their house. And I've got a lot of spiritual feelings toward those creatures that I've learned over the years. And now when I haven't researched since late 2020, but I've been out in the woods and been around some. Actually, in the Shenandoah National Forest, I was around some, and that's in Virginia. But I don't research anymore. I went through a real bad incident in 2020 after the last ones we gifted, and I pretty much had to clear my mind to feel comfortable about them again, because some of those became aggressive for no reason at all, and they did follow me home. So don't really understand everything about them, but I do know that when I go into the woods now, may sound crazy to a lot of people, but I try to become closer to the earth and let them know that I'm there not to harm them, because they can definitely read your thoughts. If you've got a camera, you're not going. If you see one, you're very fortunate. Now it may see you, half a mile away, but you won't see it. And if you've got a gun or a weapon, you're very fortunate to see one. Now, the hunter's a different story, because most of the time hunters are out there and just happen to cross one and don't see it for just a few minutes. But trail cameras, they don't like any type of camera. I've had cameras smashed. I've had cameras broken to pieces. I'm talking about trail cameras. And I never used those until 2017 or 18. I tried several of those. They were ripped off the tree, or they were turned around, or something where they didn't want their picture taken. And even people that are close friends of mine who interact with a family on a regular basis, they don't want them taking pictures of them. I do think they have some type of illumination in their hair that causes reflection to make them look blurry or whatever. I've never seen one cloak. I've never seen one go interdimensional. I do believe they do, but I've never witnessed that. I did see one go behind a large tree in an opening, and it was a large one. And it went behind this tree, and there was nothing else around it, and it never came out. And I don't know where it went, because we searched the whole area. There was nothing, nowhere for it to go. So that's possible. I do believe they can do that. I think they have special powers. I know they can read your mind. If you go in with a bad thought in your mind, or you go in with a thought, well, I'm going to shoot one of these, you're not going to see one. If you go in with a thought like, I'm in your mind, I'm here to see you, I'm here to just visit your home, I'm not staying, I'm just visiting, please allow me to your home. And then you sit down and be quiet. And my favorite time is in the dark. Pitch black dark, no flashlight. Just go into the area and sit down and let them know your meaning for being there. You just want to visit their home and you're not staying. And then your chances will increase a lot better to being able to see one. Now, of course, it's hard to see one in the dark. You can see the eye shine or the eyes. But I've been around quite a few like that would come close. They wouldn't step out where you could see them, but they'd be behind trees, and you could see their eye shine, and you could see the size of them by the silhouette of a darkness. But they're a very intelligent animal. In my opinion, they're as smart as humans. Most of them are very intelligent. And they allow us. You never find Bigfoot or forest people. They find you. And I 100% believe that. If they don't want you to see them, you're not going to see them. That's my personal opinion.
Well, let's talk about the clan that you most recently interacted with. Let's talk a little bit about how that came to be. What was the interaction like? And then I want to go into that last couple of incidences with the gifting where they became aggressive. So start with the clan, and then we'll move into that gifting incident, if you would.
Okay, I'd done lots of research in between the time frame of my second occurrence when I met the ones at the river, because I wanted that I wanted that feeling again, because I enjoyed being with those and they enjoyed me being there. And I'd been in a lot of areas and had seen a few of these creatures. Uh, Seen them, and I'd see one. I didn't see a family, or I'd see one a distance off, and I would try to interact, and they weren't interacting back with me. So I didn't continue trying to force it. I just looked for another area. Uh, what happened in 2000, and I can't remember if it was late 2017 or early 2018, sometime in that time frame. My friend Billy Howell called me up. And he said, a friend of ours, David, lives down in Cheatham County, Tennessee. And he said, David's having problems down his place. Do you want to go down there and see what's going on? And I said, well, what's happening? And he said, well, his girlfriend's there at night in the house. And these friends of ours, David and his girlfriend, live out in a remote area of Cheatham County, Tennessee, and it's a lot of wilderness. And it's, matter of fact, it butts up to the Cheatham Game Reserve, where there's just thousands of acres that you can actually hunt in. But their property backs up to that, and he said they don't know what it is. His girlfriend's scared to death because this particular person he has a trucking company, and he's gone 5 days out of the week. He runs from Nashville to New York and back, and his girlfriend's there by herself they have a couple of dogs. And she was being terrified by these things. They were coming up next to the deck and reaching up on the deck and taking all the stuff from the garden. Watermelons, cantaloupes, whatever vegetables were up there, they were taking them. And then they were looking in her windows at night and scaring her to death. And she didn't know anything about these creatures. She didn't even know they existed until she had seen them. And he told me what was going on, so I went down there with him, and we actually spent a lot of time down there the first week or two. We did a lot of walking and trying to figure out where they were coming in and how many they were, and just trying to figure out the area. And we found the area that they were coming in. Actually, my friend Billy had been there the winter before this, deer hunting on that property, and had one walk right in front of his deer blind. This is a deer blind that sits on the ground. It's like a plastic blind, like a tent top blind that has a hole in it to look out. And he had been deer hunting there, and one had walked right in front of his blind, 5 foot from him, and walked right by him and kept going. So he knew they were there, and he had told me about it. But they didn't start having problems with them till that following spring, when they were stealing the vegetables and stuff. And they'd done some construction up the road there, not too far from there. Some people were building a house, and I felt like that probably had them a little disturbed because they had been run out of their spot. And the first time we were there, we found really good evidence that there was a pretty good sized clan there. I don't know how many, but there was quite a few, because we had found enough evidence to believe that. And we started spending more time down there. And I asked Billy, I said, maybe we ought to start gifting them and see if they'll come in, and let's try to friend them. And maybe we can calm them down, and they won't be going to the house and scaring her as bad while he's gone. And she had also went out to the edge of the property, and when she had cooked and thrown out scraps, like for a dog or something, well, they had been coming into that area also eating that. So I believe that's originally what attracted them to the house, was the scraps. But we went in there, and we were there probably about the third week we were there, and when we really started gifting. And I actually went into the woods and said, if it's okay, we're going to leave. And I just speak loudly. I mean, a lot of people say you don't have to do that, people that mind speak, but I don't mind speak. So I'm not an authority on that, like my good friend Scott Pace is. But I went in and said, we're going to leave you some gifts. We hope you like them. I just spoke loudly like I am now, except a lot louder. And we're going to leave them over here at this tree. And if you want to take them, you can. And if you're not interested in us gifts, and you don't take them. And we were going back every 2 days. And the second day we went back, all the gifts were gone. So I knew they had interacted. And so Billy and I started going down there. We would take a week at a time, and he would go give them gifts, and I would take them gifts. Same type of foods, cantaloupes, that type of stuff. And I guess this went on for quite a while, and I still hadn't seen them. We were probably into maybe 6 or 7 months before I had my very first sighting of one of them. But we could hear them. We could hear them in there, and especially at night. We were going at night, right at dark, and stayed till 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning. And we would split up. He would go at the bottom of the ridge where there was a swamp that fed into a creek that went to a lake that ran into the Cumberland River. And he would sit up there, or I would, vice versa, and one of us would sit on top of a hill. Excuse me. And that night was the first night that we really had a lot of interaction. So we heard these coyotes coming. And right before that swamp, there's a large sage field. And when I say sage, I'm talking about sage grass that grows in an open field between the wood line and an old gravel road. And we heard these coyotes coming to the left, and they were getting closer. And these woods go way deep in for miles. A lot of miles deep in there. And they were coming from that direction. And he had actually had his FLIR on watching them. And I did not have a FLIR. He did. And he witnessed the coyotes running. He could see them through the FLIR the closer they got. And they were chasing a young deer, and the deer fell down, and the coyotes got a hold of it, and it was just laying there kicking. And as soon as the deer went down, the coyotes just took off running back, just went out a different direction, like they were scared of something. And then a large creature he seen run down from the wood line and grab the deer and run back into the woods. And that was our first sighting, and that was on FLIR. It was his sighting. I did not see it, but I 100% believe what Billy tells me. And shortly after that, we had tree knocks to the left. We had tree knocks to the right of me on top of the hill. And then we had tree knocks to the front of us, which was up on another hill. And we listened to that for quite a while that night. And then they kind of quietened down, and we didn't hear anything else, so we left. And we continued doing the same type thing that we've been doing. And I had called a friend of mine at that time, who was a good friend named Charlie Raymond, who's over the Kentucky Bigfoot. He has his own Bigfoot organization. And I told him what we had and see if he wanted to come down and help us. And he did come down, and he brought his tent, and him and a friend set up, and they stayed there for about 3 nights. 3 or 4 days and nights. And he had a lot of interaction. They would come around his tent at night into his camping gear and everything else. And we were basically just trying to get a reaction from them to let them know that we were there to be friendly with them, but at the same time, we didn't want them to go to the house and scare her. So we kept gifting, and I was sitting in the truck the week after that, and the truck goes all the way to the wood line next to a garage, and it goes way back in there. And Billy was actually in the driver's side, and one of the little ones run out of the woods, looked right at me, and turned around and ran back into the woods. This was a juvenile. When I say a little one, it was a young one. and it ran back into the woods. Well, I immediately wanted to know where it went, and I jumped out of the truck and kind of followed where it went, and it was in the same area that we had been setting up. And that night was when it got really crazy. So we got back in there probably 200, 300 yards from the garage where our truck was parked and set up in our regular locations. And I was to the right and behind a big tree that had forks in it, and I was sitting in a chair that I'd carried in, a fold-up chair, and Billy had one. He was to the left. And the strangest thing is, this is probably the craziest thing I've ever seen, but looking up over this hill in front of me, straight ahead of me, it was probably 70, 80 yards, not feet, but yards away. You could see the top of the hill. And this was the same ridge line that these people had been coming down to get their gifts. And they always sent the juvenile to get the gifts, and he'd run back in the woods with it. But we were sitting there, and all of a sudden, from the top of that ridge, I seen what looked like a light bulb. That's the only way I can subscribe it, because it looked just like a light bulb that you have in your house. It was glowing so white, and it looked like it was on the ground. And this thing came down from that ridge, and right at the bottom of that ridge was a small ravine about 3 or 4 foot deep, and then it comes back up onto the ground. And I watched that light bulb coming real slow. I mean, it was very slow across the ground. And I couldn't figure out what it was. I'd never seen anything like that. And this little small that looked like a light bulb came all the way, and it was coming right to me. Well, I got a little nervous. I didn't know what this thing was, and it was coming right to where I was sitting. And it got about 2 foot in front of me, and Billy was to the left of me, and he had a large light that would light the whole woods up. And he hit the light on it, and this thing that was, I don't know, 3, 4 inches round that looked like a light bulb on the ground, it turned into a possum, an opossum. I know it sounds crazy, but it's the truth. And it turned into an opossum, and it actually reared up and hissed at me and turned around and walked back to where it came from. And I was kind of weirded out, and so was he. Thought, what is this? We'd never seen anything like this in there before. And probably within about 30 minutes or a little, maybe 45, where it went back up to the same area that it came in, he and I both were still sitting in the same spot, and we seen these 2 huge orbs. They were about the size of a beach ball, and I do have pictures of those with my cell phone. A lot of pictures we took there didn't turn out at all. There was nothing on the picture, but we did get a picture of some of the things there. But these things came down from the trees somewhere in the top of the sky, the trees. It was thick cover. It was still in the fall, and the leaves were still on the trees. And they came down. They were about the size of beach balls. They were right next to each other, and they were glowing inside and kind of pulsating, kind of a pink, orange, and red color, like, it's hard to explain, like little lightning bolts inside. They were just pulsating. And these 2 orbs were about the size of a beach ball, which I've already said, and they were right next to each other. And they hovered about a foot off the ground. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and we'd never seen anything like this. And they just sat there and hovered for 30 minutes or longer, and then they started slowly going down the hill toward the gifting spot. And they were actually getting closer to us, because we were fairly close to the gifting spot, because we wanted to see the creatures come in to get the food. And the closer they got to the gifting spot, they started separating just a little bit. So he and I both decided to go to the truck. So we leave and go to the truck, and we get in his truck, and we go down across this bridge, and on the other side of this wood line, is that sage-grass field. Well, there's an old gravel road that goes back in there. And we drove down that gravel road, and we could see those two orbs. They were going back through the woods real slow until we watched them disappear. Well, he got sick. I got sick, and I've never been sick like that. It was a strange sick. It was really weird. I felt like I was sick at my stomach. I had a headache. My legs were tingly. He got the same thing. Don't know what caused that, but I've been plenty of people tell me we got zapped or radiation or whatever it may have been. But we were sick enough that we both went back to our truck and we were going back to our truck to lay down after we had went down the road because we just felt pretty bad. And we didn't go back. We got back to the truck, and after it took us a couple hours to get over that. And we decided we wasn't going back that week, so we didn't gift them that week. Well, the next week we went back, and it was raining, but it wasn't raining hard, more of a drizzle type rain, but it'd been raining hard all day. And we got into the woods, and we realized, well, let's just get Billy's deer blind, and we'll set in it, this plastic blind, which kept us dry. And we both got in it, and we could see out the window in it. And we're waiting for them to come out again at the gifting area. We did leave some gifts when we went in that night. And then all of a sudden, well, I can tell you, I don't know exactly when it was, but when it ended, it was 12:48 because I'll get to that in a minute. But all of a sudden, these white orbs about the size of a softball started coming way back in the woods. We could see little dots, and they were getting bigger. And these white orbs started flying all around the trees and coming toward us and flying around our blind and going up. They were just going up high and low, and they were moving fast. And there was exactly I'm going to say exactly, but there were 6 or 7 of them. And they were just flying in different patterns all around the woods. And about that time, we get a call from the lady back at the house. She says, the creatures are back here. And Billy had his cell phone. I had my cell phone. So we get up and run back to the house behind us. Before we get there, our truck alarms go off. And it's like the burglar alarm on your truck. And the guy that lived there, David, had come home since we went back there, and he had a big white 4-door Ford Dually parked behind our trucks. His truck alarm went off, and these alarms went off for probably 45 minutes. We could not get them to turn off. We tried to get them to turn off, and they wouldn't turn off with a key in it. My cell phone went dead. The FLIR went dead. My watch stopped at 12:48. I was sick again. He was sick again. He laid in his truck, and I laid mine on my seat back, trying to get to feeling better. And these truck alarms rang until they just went off on their own, and they all quit about the same time. And we were really kind of feeling pretty strange on what was going on there. So we really never understood it. So the next morning, we spent the night at his house there, and the next morning we got up and I'm 6'5" and I weigh about 270, and Billy's strong. He's a former Golden Glove boxer and champion here where we grew up. And David is a big guy. He's bigger than me, not quite as tall. We tried our best to push those vehicles as hard as we could to make the alarm go off. We never could make the alarm go off. And then on the back of his truck, we found a handprint. I've got big hands, but this handprint was almost twice the size of mine. And it was on the tailgate where it was dusty on the back of the tailgate. So we figured somehow they'd shook them and made them go off or whatever they did. But that pretty much got us kind of nervous to go down there, so we decided to take a break for a while. And we didn't go down there for probably 2 or 3 weeks. We really didn't know what was going on. And that's when it started at my house. And that was probably the craziest thing I've ever been through. So I don't, still today, I have no idea what we did to alarm these creatures, but apparently I did something, because they only came to my house and they started terrorizing my farm. And they went on for nearly 3 months. Started off at about 3 in the morning. It sounded like somebody had a ball bat hitting the side of my house, on the right side of my house. And then it would go on the left side of my house. And my house is a pretty good sized home. And it was so loud on the right side when whatever was banging on my house. I actually took my rifle and went outside with my dog and went around the side of the house, and there was nothing there. And of course it quit, but there was nothing there, and it would start up again. I'd run out on the left side and there was nothing there, but I could hear it. And they banged so loud on it one night that the pictures actually shook on the wall. So I don't know how they did it, but they did. And then it got worse. I probably had, I'm just making a guess, probably 25 cats on my farm. And they mainly lived in my barn and my stable. But they would come on the front porch at night sometimes and stay. And I also had a mother cat that had kittens in the left corner of my porch. And I have a huge porch. It's about 20 foot deep, plank porch, kind of a country style type house. And these things, within 3 months, killed all my cats. I'd find them everywhere, ripped to pieces, even the kittens on the front porch. They tore down my, I had a pool behind my house, an in-ground pool. It was, I don't know, it's about 48 foot long, 28 foot wide. They tore the pool gate down on both sides of the pool. They were banging on the back of my pool house so hard, they tore all the vinyl off of it and actually tore a hole in the wall on it. They took all the light bulbs out of the fixtures for back there that were motion censored. My horses were so scared in the front. I had, when you come in my drive to the left side, I've got a big area that's fenced. My stable is in that one. And it's probably 50 foot from the drive. And on the right side coming in, I have a big barn. And I had 2 horses in that barn, a mare and a gelding. And on the left side, I had two geldings. And these horses were so scared that they were in the corner up next to the driveway under the street lights that I had there. I had a street light in each corner up there that kind of lit up the barn and the stable where they could see at night, because I had a big roll of hay out there they could eat. And they were so scared, they were up in the corner as close to the house as they could get underneath that light. And they were just going crazy, jumping up and down and everything else. So I went down there with my gun, went through the stable, cut all the lights on in the stable, the barn, never found anything, found plenty of tracks where they had been there, but I didn't see the creatures. This has been going on for a good while. I went through this for about 6 or 7 weeks, and I was just about at the point where I didn't know what to do with them. I about had enough. And so one night I have a screened-in porch on the back of my house, which overlooks the pool on the left side of my house. And I went out before it got dark, and I got down between a Coke machine I had and a freezer, and I had my rifle and my pistol, and I was going to try to catch them coming out to the left side to where they were banging on the house. And I had a round pen, which you may not know what that is, but it's a fence that you put together that you run your horses in and when you're riding them. for somebody that doesn't know how to ride. And I put that on the right side where they couldn't come in. They had to come to the left side, which was blocking the wood line. They could jump the fence if they wanted to, but I figured they would probably take the easier route, which they did. And I did see one of the creatures that night come out of the woods and go toward my house. It was a really good distance from me. And I got up with my rifle and went towards the screen, and it ran. And by this time, they didn't do a lot of banging that night. They got kind of quiet because I figured they had spotted me, and they had. So the next morning, I went out on my porch, my front porch, and I was having coffee, and I looked in the front of my house, and probably about 70 yards in front of my house, I've got these huge white-colored sycamore trees. Some of them are just huge. They're right on a creek bank, and I've got a creek that runs on the left side of my house that feeds into a big lake. And there was a sycamore tree in the middle that was not as big as the other ones. And one of these things had broke this sycamore tree off about 10 foot up, and this was a good-sized break. It was a good 6-inch round where it had broke it and just snapped it, and it was laying down toward the ground. It was still attached to the tree, but it was broken. It was kind of like a sign the way I took it, because I looked down there and seen that, and I knew that wasn't natural. We hadn't had any storms, and they had just broken it. So I walked down there and actually had some friends over at that time, and they went down with me, and they seen all the tracks, big, huge tracks. And I knew they were trying to let me know. I was at the point where I really thought they were going to probably try to kill me. So I didn't know what their intention was, because I hadn't done anything to them. It was really strange, because this went on practically. Occasionally they would skip a night, but then they would come back the next night and it would be worse. So I kept having things tore up. My daughter had this thing probably weighs 3,000 pounds or more. My little girl at that time was probably 5 or 6 years old, and I had a huge playhouse that she played in. And it took a flatbed truck to unload it when I had it built for her into the yard. It was sitting on blocks. They turned that over. And to turn that over, I can tell you 3 or 4 men couldn't even move it, because we tried to. So they turned that over. And that made me realize that these things are really mad at me for some reason. I don't really understand why. So I guess it was a couple nights later. It had calmed down a little bit, and I was still a nervous wreck. I was there by myself because I'm not married. My ex is with my children at another location, and they were coming over during the evening. I'd have to take them home. And at that time, I was in office, and I had the police department. I asked one of my officers on his shift if he would drive down the driveway at night. Now, my driveway is 3,300 feet from the road, and it goes around to the right in the back of my house. I said, if you don't mind tonight when you're on your shift, could you run down my driveway and spotlight the area and see if you see anything? And he said, sure, what time? I said, well, whatever time you want to, preferably 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, because he was on a shift from 11 to 7. And I said, if you got time, you don't want to call, I'd appreciate it if you do that. And I had some other friends that staked out the driveway that night. They were in a truck. And I just wanted somebody to get a glimpse on them. And I was at the point where I've never wanted to kill one, except maybe the first occurrence I had. But I was at the point where I would have probably have shot these. And I told them to let me know if they'd seen any of them. And they didn't see anything. The officer that come down my driveway didn't either. And later on that night, it was probably about 4 o'clock in the morning, later than normal, maybe 4:30. They'd already went home, all of them. My friends in the driveway went home. They had left. And I heard them on my front porch. And of course, I'm sitting there. You got a picture of this. I'm sitting there with a gun in my own house, with actually a pistol and a revolver, and also my rifle, because I don't know if these things are going to come in and get me or not. So I'm sitting there in my den and just waiting on it to start. And I just about went to sleep thinking they weren't going to bother me that night, because normally it was around 3 o'clock in the morning. And it was much later at this time. And then I heard a bang, a real loud bang on my front porch, or in the front of the house somewhere. So I immediately got up and run toward the front of my house. And my door I have is real thick. It's maybe 5-6 inches thick. It's a real tall wooden door made out of oak, and it's about 10 foot tall. And it has a round, like oval glass in the middle of it. And I looked out that glass, and I'm in the hallway at this time, and I seen one walk by in front of the glass. I could just see the shadow of it. And then I seen it walk by the window, which is the window next to the door. And then I seen another one walk by. And then about that time, there's this huge crash, slams on my door. Well, I've already thought they're coming in. I've done ready to fire. And this huge crash, something just hits my door as loud as it can. And I opened my door. By this time, I was at the point where they was either getting me or I was getting them. So I opened the door up with my gun and just turned to fire. And they weren't there, but they had thrown a goat, a dead goat, on my front door. And I don't have goats. My neighbors don't have goats. I have no idea where this goat came from. And it was laying at the bottom of my doorway. Well, by this time, I was just at the point where I've got to do something, because these things are crazy. And I didn't know why it was happening. I couldn't sleep. And I'd had friends over there to help guard the house while I tried to sleep. And I was pretty much a nervous wreck, to be honest with you. I didn't really know what to do, how to handle the situation. So I called a friend of mine on the phone, and that was a real good friend of mine that had some luck with this type of stuff happening to him. And I'm pretty sure he reached out to Scott Patterson. And I can't remember for sure which one it was that told me, but he said, you can get rid of them, just rebuke them. And I said, well, what is rebuking them? And he said, well, what you do, he said, first of all, are you a Christian? And I said, sure, I'm a Christian. I believe in Jesus Christ, pray every day, and I'm a Christian. He said, well, if you believe in your heart that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, rebuke them. I said, well, how do I do that? He said, go to all four corners of your house and say, in the name of Jesus Christ, leave my home and don't come back. And I said, come on now, that's going to work? He says, it will work. So he says, it works for most everybody that's had these problems. So I went to all four corners of my house, not once, but twice, and said that. I went outside on my property, and I said the same thing. And I didn't actually come up with a corner on my property, because it kind of makes a different shape on one end of it. But I walked around the property and did it 4 times, several times. And I went in that night, and I was locked and loaded and ready for it to happen again, and never happened again. So how rebuking worked, I have no idea, but it worked, and I'm thankful that it did.
I can only imagine what that was like going through that for so long. I've had people tell me similar stories that, it's a one night thing, or they're out camping and something happens that scares the crap out of them. But that over and over in your own home, I couldn't imagine.
Well, I can tell you right now, I still feel that fear. It scared me to death, because I honestly thought they were going to kill me. So I don't know why, but they were just I don't know what the orbs had to do with it. That's another thing. I've never figured out what that had to do with it. Because I'd never seen orbs. Let me rephrase that. I've seen an orb a couple of times way off in the distance going through a woods or something, but I don't know what it had to do with it. I don't know why they were, or if it was just part of that particular clan that part of them didn't like us or didn't want us there. I don't know how they followed me home. I do have, say something very strange that I didn't mention that my friends know about, my close friends. I did, after that occurrence we had where we got really sick, where our truck alarms went off, I had like mosquito bites on right above my elbow on both sides of my arm, and I couldn't figure out why they were in the same spot, but they kind of itched for a couple of weeks, and it formed like a knot under my skin on both sides. I know it sounds really strange. It would to me too if I was an audience listening to this. But what I'm telling you actually happened. I'm not. I may have left something out, but I haven't added anything. But after 4 or 5 months, these things wouldn't go away on my arm, and they kept itching, and it was hard to explain. I went to the doctor, and he goes, "Oh, you just got something." He gave me some cream. He said it'll be okay. It'll go away. You've gotten bit by something, or you've got into some type of vegetation that's caused this. And I said, I don't know what it is. This went on for 6 or 7 months. And one night I noticed that the one on my left arm was kind of, it's hard to explain this, but I still got the one on my right arm. But the one on my left arm was kind of like the skin was kind of protruding out, and it was like something was in it. So, as crazy as this sounds, I actually took out a sharp pocket knife I had and cut that spot, and I pulled out something that looked like a little piece of rice. It was a gray colored little piece, so it was about the half the size of a tiny piece of rice. And I don't know what that is, but that was what was in my arm. And the one in my left arm my right arm, it's still in there. I can't get it out. And I went to the doctor and asked them, and they said it was just something I'd stuck in my arm. But I don't know I don't know how they got in my arm or what happened, how they got there, or what that is in my arm. Maybe it is something that I stuck in my arm. I don't recall it. I think I would, because, I'm out at my farm putting up fencing all the time and repairing fencing and that type of thing. So I could have easily, scratched my arm or something, but I think I would remember if it was in the same spot, but I don't recall how it got there. So I had friends that told me, well, they put a tracking device in you. Well, how did they put a tracking device in my arm? Because I don't remember anything doing that. So I don't know that it has anything to do with it. It's just a thought that crossed my mind.
Yeah, you got to think of everything. That's for sure. I want to talk about, before we close out, I want to talk about your group, the Bigfoot Believers and Other Creatures on Facebook. Talk a little bit about the group, where people can find that, what they find when they visit the group.
Well, we got to just, not because it's my group, because it's not my group. I started the group, but I have so many good moderators and experts in the group. Very proud of that group. I was actually in another group quite a few years ago that I went in with Michael Patterson when we started. And my only reason for starting this group was back in February of last year, I actually started the group. And my basic reason, because I was so tired of all the people criticizing people for their encounters or their comments or their pictures and that type of thing. And our group allows no criticism, no rudeness, no laughing emojis. You're welcome to come on our group and tell any story, any encounter you've had, post, comment, and you don't have to worry about anybody criticizing you for that. So our group we're very, very fortunate. I have so many what I call big stars in my group, that I'm so proud that they joined our group. We have Ron Moorhead, Doug Hagajak, Paul Blackburn, Ken Gerhardt, those bigger people to me. And then I have so many great researchers. I can't even stop naming all of them. and researchers in my group, and then just a fantastic amount of great members who are just new and trying to learn, and they're able to come on and tell their stories and encounters without being ridiculed. So it's a great group. We're very fortunate. We're just growing so fast. We're up to about 17,000 people, and I've been told by other people that we're the fastest growing group in Facebook history. So it's only because of the people I have in the group. It's not me. So I have a lot of good people that help out, so many moderators and experts. And actually, you're an expert yourself. I made you one when you joined, but I certainly appreciate everybody that's been involved and help us build this group and to make people feel comfortable telling their encounters. Because, of course, I wasn't able to do that for years. I just had to live with my own encounter because everybody thought I was crazy. So times have changed and people are more open-minded than they once were.
It's a great group. I will link to it in the show notes. Everybody go over and check it out. Daryl, I've had a blast talking to you. Thank you so much, man. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
It's been an honor being on your show. Been a real honor, and I certainly appreciate you having me. And anything I can do for you also, thank you very much.
They say you don't